Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come to speak to you today. At the moment, it feels like somewhere between an honour and totally scary, but we'll stick with it being an honour. It was really good to hear Richard's talk about Valley Steps first, because it's very much as we've come into the 21st century. It seems that emotional distress seems to have been made out to be something totally abnormal, and actually it's something we all experience at some point in our lives. And clearly what Valley Steps offers is tools to help people so that you can learn to self-soothe which is so empowering, without needing to go and see your GP, for example. So I'm here to tell you today, I've been asked to come and tell you about how I became dependent on an SSRI antidepressant. I took it for 17 years. I didn't choose to take it for that long, and that will become clearer as we go along. I want to talk a little bit more about dependence and withdrawal to give you a feel for what both of those things are, so we have a better understanding of that. And also to talk about the campaign that I became involved in. And my campaign was very much, it got two prongs. Recognition for antidepressant withdrawal, because it would appear that GPs don't recognise it. And support, the lack of support that there is for people like me who became dependent on prescribed medication. And through my campaign with the Welsh Government, it seems that they want to add to your workload, because they see, or they have suggested, that pharmacists can help patients be monitored and taper and withdraw from their antidepressants. And frankly, I think you have your work cut out for you, because the resources aren't really there to help you do that at the moment. And that's something that we'll tap into as we move forward. So I'll start by just giving you a little overview as to how I got into the position that I did. So back end of 1996, December, I went to the GP finally, because I was suffering with intermittent insomnia when I was travelling on business, which was causing me problems, and some hormonal issues. I was in my early 40s. And the doctor told me, and took me completely by surprise, he said that I was on the edge of a clinical depression, and that I had a chemical imbalance in my brain. And he prescribed me Seroxat. And I took it for a while, and when I wanted to stop taking it, I found I became even more ill, symptoms even worse, far worse than when I went to see the doctor in the first place. And so I'd go back to the doctor and he'd say, "My word, you are ill, aren't you? Okay, you've relapsed, you have a generalised anxiety disorder, you need to keep taking these pills." And so I did. I believed everything that he told me. And I tried a couple more times. Each time, the same thing would occur in a very, very quickly, I'm talking about 36 to 48 hours after I would reduce or stop taking the medication. I became highly anxious. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop crying. And there was a little voice in my head all the time that was saying to me, "You know, this doesn't really make sense that you're this ill." And so in 2002, I followed my intuition, and I had a little search on the internet, and I found that there were lots of people out there. There was particularly a Seroxat user group, lots of people out there having exactly the same problem as me, the same symptoms, the same difficulties when they tried to stop taking Seroxat. So I learnt that I'd become dependent on this drug, and the symptoms that I had were actually withdrawal. So I want to run what I think is a pretty good definition of dependence in front of you, so that we have this common understanding. And I've tried to, so you don't have to read it all, underline the lines, the things that are most important. This is taken from the Inner Compass Initiative, which is a project that's on the internet to help people withdraw. So it's very, very important that you understand that psychiatric drug-induced dependence is an entirely physical condition. It's not mental, it's not in your head, it's entirely physical, that comes about when the body, especially the brain and the central nervous system, changes its structure and functioning in response to the ongoing presence of psychiatric medication. It's very important that you understand it's not addiction. The media love to use the word addiction in the headlines, addicted to antidepressants. You don't become addicted to antidepressants. There's no craving. And in general, those of us who have taken the drug or are in the process of taking them, you don't know that you've become physically dependent. You don't know that it's happening. And you generally don't know until you stop trying to take the drug. And then you experience uncomfortable, disruptive, or even dangerous mental, emotional, and physical reactions. And these are withdrawal reactions. And these are the withdrawal reactions which GPs do not recognise, and they say that their patients are relapsing. And I have further evidence of that I will talk about later on. And so we're in a bit of a catch-22 here. The doctors aren't recognising it. As I was told, it was relapse, and so the patient is put back on the drug. And so you have a situation which I think is really quite sad, because you have a narrative of illness. You're really ill, aren't you? You need to keep taking this drug. Where actually, if doctors recognised withdrawal, then maybe they would be saying to their patients, well, there's a good chance that possibly you're in withdrawal, and that if we can help you through this process, that you could well be well. And that's a narrative of wellness, which I think is much, much better. Now, I flagged up some withdrawal symptoms. I'm not going to leave this up for very long, but you'll see this is from Mind. I've just lifted this again from the internet, and you'll see there's a range of symptoms which are recognised as being antidepressant withdrawal symptoms. Some interesting one there. Electric shock sensations in the head, brain zaps we call those. You haven't lived if you haven't experienced brain zaps. And a number of other things, disturbed sleep, fatigue, mood swings. There's a range of things there. And they seem a bit random, a bit chaotic, and you can understand how if you're in front of a doctor and you're describing some of these symptoms, they're not going to make sense in any way, shape or form. I tried to make sense of them a bit, and I'll come on to that in a moment. Just to continue with my story, to get the rest of that out of the way, I kept trying to come off this drug. And each time I tried, the symptoms I experienced were worse each time, until I reached the point where I decided that I was just going to give up trying, really, and maybe that I did need to be on these drugs and just stay on them. I got down to a very, very tiny dose. I was using liquid, I was using a syringe, I was taking tinier and tinier and tiny doses. And I had understood from the internet that the slower you went, the least likely you were to have any symptoms, and then you could come off this drug with no withdrawal symptoms at all. But actually, that turns out that it's not true. However, life got in the way, and in November 2009, out of the blue, I developed a movement disorder, which is extremely unpleasant. And I saw neurologists, and they said I had medically unexplained symptoms because there was nothing on a brain scan that showed why I had this particular movement disorder. I lose control of my body, and I jerk as if I'm having an epileptic fit, but I'm actually awake, and I know exactly what's going on. I've got a functional neurological disorder. But again, stubborn little me, my intuition told me, well, I just can't believe I've been on this drug for so long. it must have affected my physical body or my nervous system in some way. And so I asked to see Dr. David Healy, who is a psychiatrist in North Wales. Some of you may have heard of him. He's also renowned for being an expert in SSRIs and in adverse drug reactions. And I asked to see him, and he confirmed that my long-term use of Thyroxat was the most likely reason for me having this movement disorder. So I knew I had to stop taking it, really, whatever the consequences. So at the very lowest dose I could get, which was 1.78 ml of the liquid, and I diluted that with water, which my doctor and GlaxoSmithKline recommended that I didn't do, but I was, we're in desperate circumstances here trying to get off this stuff. You'll do anything to try getting off it. I stopped at that low dose, and I went through 4 years of pretty bad withdrawal. Now, it's a bit of an understatement. It was pretty awful withdrawal, actually. My symptoms were so bad and I felt so ill. I read up on trauma. I felt that the symptoms that I had, that my body and mind were pretty traumatised by the whole thing. And I did, from a trauma therapist, she did agree that I had post-traumatic stress injury from constantly, over a period of years, going into withdrawal until the last go at it was so bad. After these 4 years, as you can imagine, I was getting pretty angry about what had happened to me, and I was following what was going on social media, and I could see that things haven't really changed very much. People are still being told that they have a chemical imbalance in their brains, which has never been proven. In 30 years, that has never been proven. That chemical imbalance causes depression or anxiety or any psychiatric disorder that I'm aware of. People were still being told, no, your symptoms are not withdrawal, they're relapse. And this prompted me to try and bring this to the attention of the Welsh Government. So I raised a petition. I was prompted by a lady in Scotland who had raised a petition in Scotland. Now, these withdrawal symptoms, I tried to make sense of them, and what I'm going to show you now is my layman's version of what I think, of what I felt was going on for me when I was in withdrawal. And it all comes down to serotonin, really. So I did a lot of research on the internet, and serotonin, as we know, is a neurotransmitter which carries messages in the brain across cells, and SSRIs slow down the absorption of serotonin. And so I looked into what serotonin does in the body. And 95% of it is in the gut. It's responsible for peristalsis. It's responsible for your appetite. It's responsible for your muscles contracting and relaxing. It is found in your heart. Apparently, it helps regulate your blood pressure. It's so important for regulating your sleep cycle. And very, very importantly, it's in your brain. It's in your central nervous system. And people talk about it being to do with your mood, but I prefer to describe it as it's where your peace of mind comes from, where your sense of well-being comes from. It's actually where your sense of safety comes from, whether you feel comfortable in your own skin, whether you feel safe in the world. And I was able to look at my symptoms, and most of these are my symptoms. I did add in 1 or 2, and I've actually missed some out. But I could fit most of what I was experiencing under these headings. So my gut became totally dysfunctional. Terrible IBS, terrible gastritis. My muscles were just rigid. Made my movement disorder far, far worse. I'd lie in bed, unable to sleep at all. Heart going. Oh, I shouldn't do it that side, should I? Sorry, heart going. Pretend it's there. Palpitations, arrhythmia. And I had constant waves of fear coming over me. And the amygdala in the brain is the key player in the processing of fear. And I understand that that is predominantly moderated by the neurotransmitter serotonin. So I became hypervigilant with these waves of fear coming over me. And if you imagine, I'd just like you to think about if you have that many of your bodily functions not working properly all at once, how long could you stand it before you became really seriously ill and traumatized? You know, could you stand all that going on for a day, a week, a month? No wonder that people who go into antidepressant withdrawal, particularly if they've been on the drug for a long, long time, become so severely ill. And they do. They do. And the SSRIs are claimed to be a targeted drug. But when you look at what happens to your body when it goes into withdrawal, as far as I'm concerned, it's not targeted. It's an absolute blunderbuss. I want to talk now about a little bit more, just to give you an idea of the campaign that has been going on throughout the UK to draw attention to people about antidepressant withdrawal. So in Westminster, there's an all-party parliamentary group, which you may well have heard that there is a review, Public Health England, of prescribed medication at the moment, and they're looking at benzos, antidepressants, the gabapentins, the opioids, all the drugs to which people can become dependent. And we're hoping that they will report fairly soon. There is a petition in Scotland, which has spawned a short life working group, and I raised the petition in Wales. They produced this beautiful document, which is their report, the Petitions Committee report to the government, and the government has accepted the majority of the recommendations that the Petitions Committee suggested. If I'd been talking to you 6 months ago, I'd be saying we're still struggling to get people to understand the extent to which patients can suffer from antidepressant withdrawal. But in the last 3 months, things have really changed and we're beginning to be heard. There have been various reports that have come out, and I just want to mention 2 or 3 of those that are very important ones, one of which that I was involved in writing, so that's why it feels important to me. But the first one is Davies and Reed, which came out in October 2018, and they did a systematic review into all the research that was available on antidepressants, and they looked into the incidence, severity and duration of antidepressant withdrawal effects, and they raised the question, are the guidelines evidence-based? Because there is a problem with antidepressant guidelines. And that was published in the Journal of Addictive Behaviours, and they pointed out that 56% of people are likely to get antidepressant withdrawal, and 46% of those are likely to claim that their withdrawal is severe. I was involved in writing a report with Dr. Anne Guy, who is a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Prescribed Drug Dependence, and Marion Brown, who raised the Scottish petition. Both petitions committees asked for people to send in their stories as evidence, basically, as evidence to prove what we were saying really exists. And they, both the Scottish and Wales petitions committees were really quite distressed by the stories that they did receive. And Anne, Marion and I looked at these stories and we mined some data from them. We pulled out data which actually showed that for most of these patients, as they went through their health service through their health service providers, and it could be in Some of them were Australia, some were Canada, the majority were this country. But there were key failure points. We identified failure points where their health services had let them down, and we could tell that the points at which they'd been let down, i.e., what I mean by let down, I mean that withdrawal hadn't been recognised, that was in each case to do with the antidepressant guidelines. And another piece of research which I want to mention, Horowitz and Taylor, tapering SSRI treatment to mitigate withdrawal symptoms. And they have actually been able to give some indication of the mechanism as to why, as people reduce their medication, they get worse and worse. The symptoms get worse and worse the lower you go. And why I wanted to highlight these two people, Dr. Taylor and Dr. Horowitz, is that they are psychiatrists, both of whom took antidepressants and suffered very bad withdrawal, and that's what prompted them to write this research. We've had a media campaign behind us, the Daily Mail have been behind us, and all of this has finally put pressure on the Royal College of Psychiatry to finally produce a new position statement saying, yeah, okay, we agree, antidepressants cause withdrawal, it can be severe, and they are now putting pressure on NICE to produce new guidelines. At the end of my presentation, by the way, which I understand is going to be available to you, and I'm sure you're all going to go home and read it, I have actually listed all the sources of all the research and the things that I'm talking about here, so that you can have access to it if you so desire. There is an organisation called RISK, a member of whom is David Healy, who I mentioned a short while ago. In June last month, they have finally succeeded in petitioning the European Medicines Agency, who have acknowledged that people taking SSRI antidepressants can get serious, permanent sexual dysfunction. I don't know if you know that a healthy volunteer taking an SSRI antidepressant, in 30 minutes of taking the drug, will experience some form of genital numbing. And I never thought I'd stand in front of people and say genital numbing, but this is, sorry, I've made you laugh, but this is serious. People who take antidepressants can end up without, at the end of it, either during the time they're taking them or permanently lose the ability to make love, which is a terrible thing. A terrible thing. Did you know, I bet you don't, because it's not been in the media, that at the moment, as we speak, there is a High Court action. A group of people are taking GlaxoSmithKline to court because of the severe withdrawal that you can get from taking Seroxat. I was part of that class action once. I'm not now. I won't go into that. And finally, the last piece of research that I managed to get on here before I gave my presentation in was back end of June, where Hengartner and Pledery have done a re-evaluation of the FDA database looking at antidepressants and suicide risk in randomised controlled trials, and have stated that patients on SSRIs are more than twice as likely to attempt suicide than similarly depressed patients not on SSRIs. Huge amount of research now coming to actually support in those of us who have been saying for a long time that SSRIs aren't the benign, safe and effective drugs that has been the narrative up until now. I've been mentioning the guidelines. This is the problem with the current NICE guidelines. When stopping or reducing antidepressants, advise people that discontinuation symptoms, and that's the term that's used. Eli Lilly in the late 1990s campaigned for the word withdrawal not to be used in connection with Prozac, and that has spilled over into all antidepressants. So we're not allowed to use the word withdrawal, although I hope there will be in the new guidelines. Discontinuation symptoms are usually mild and self-limiting over about 1 week, and normally GPs are advised to gradually reduce the dose over 4 weeks. And this is how come people end up so very ill, because those guidelines are not correct. My petition, which I'm going to move on to now, because it moves into pharmacy. I just wanted to put this one up very briefly because I'm quite proud of this one. I'd had a lot of correspondence with the Welsh Government and their medical experts in advance of raising the petition and at the beginning of the petition. And we finally have, in the government response to the committee's recommendation, 2 statements which are really, really important. The first of all is the Welsh Government recognises that those of us who become dependent on prescribed medication, we have not abused and we shouldn't be pushed into the substance misuse network pathway, because that is what's been happening up till now. And they've also stated in writing that SSRI and SNRI antidepressants are associated with withdrawal symptoms consistent with inadvertent dependence. And I feel that is a big success. I'm skipping the next slide because these are all the recommendations that the government accepted, but if you want to look at those, I haven't got time to go through all those, and you wouldn't want me to. But I want to just highlight a few of the recommendations that were accepted. This is an interesting one. It was accepted in principle. I hope that some of you know that there is actually an NHS-funded prescribed medication support service up in North Wales. Now, when I embarked on my campaign, I and my fellow campaigners believed there were no National Health funded services to help anybody with prescribed medication dependence. But it seems there is up in North Wales, and the Welsh Government didn't know about this. I had to tell them. So the recommendation was that basically, I mean, I was campaigning for this to be rolled out Wales-wide, and it should be rolled out UK-wide. This is a group of people who set up an organisation 20 years ago to help people with benzo dependence, really, and benzo withdrawal, and the Z drugs. Now they are helping people with antidepressants. So the government has accepted this in principle, but basically they say, well, really it's the job of the GP to do this. And I don't believe the GPs will be able to take this on. And this is an area where, of course, the suggestion is that pharmacists can help. But these people, they understand what is required to help people taper and withdraw from prescribed medications, particularly the benzos and antidepressants. This is a recommendation that I'm afraid was rejected, and I don't believe it should have been. I wanted antidepressants to be added to the list of drugs targeted for reduction, but if that isn't able to happen, that there should be a national prescribing indicator so that we know in Wales where they're being prescribed, who to, for how long, and to have a better understanding about antidepressant prescribing. And I feel that it's wrong that the government should have rejected this, particularly because they now accept that these antidepressants are associated with withdrawal symptoms consistent with inadvertent dependence. Now I'm getting to you guys. And the Welsh Government recommended that pharmacists, your expertise can help with patient monitoring and provision of help with tapering and withdrawing from medication. Now, I kind of feel that you've got your work cut out for you because what is required to do this job, to help people, doesn't really seem to exist at the moment, apart from with the prescribed medication service, with some of the charities like the Bristol Withdrawal Project, and there's the Oldham Tranquilizer Project. There are a number of charities that can help, but the information that is required for the safe tapering and bringing people down slowly off different antidepressants, that doesn't exist for you to access as NHS staff. There's a huge number of antidepressants being prescribed. You will have read in England, it was quoted 7.9 million antidepressant prescriptions between 2017 and 2018. And The Guardian did a Freedom of Information Act, and they found in England there are 4 million long-term users, 1 in 6 people overall taking antidepressants, but new users declining, which is a positive trend. I don't see any reason why there probably aren't a similar number of long-term users in Wales or Scotland, and it's likely that it is 1 in 6 people in Wales. Also, I don't know what the precise figure is. We've got 5.6 million prescriptions in 2017 to 2018 actually dispensed. So there's a lot of prescriptions out there, and so there are going to be a lot of people who are going to need hand-holding. And it always amazes me that we have state-funded help for someone in heroin dependency and heroin withdrawal. The state will pick people up and take them through a process and help them get better. And £53 million in Wales is spent helping people with alcohol or drug misuse, street drug misuse. But there is no such care available for people who have been to their doctors. And I want to be very clear that my frame around this is people who went to their doctors for help and were given a prescription, and they did nothing other than do what their doctors told them to. We need that level of care and hand-holding and gently taking people to becoming well again. I read some research on Sunday that I came across for the first time. It only came out in May, and I read it, unfortunately, before I was able to include it on the slides here. It's research by a number of people, and it's called Helping People Discontinue Long-Term Antidepressants, a View of Health Professionals in UK Primary Care. And it's just been published in BMJ Open. And I knew of one of the professors, Professor Tony Kendrick, who is in the Faculty of Medicine at Southampton University. And I spoke to him yesterday about this particular research. And they interviewed a number of health professionals, including, well, predominantly GPs, to find out how they felt about helping people, monitoring and helping people discontinue from their antidepressants, which is effectively what the Welsh Government is asking you guys to help with. And GPs have a problem with it. They have a problem with who is responsible for broaching the subject with the patient. They are concerned about destabilising the situation if the patient is, think that the patient is doing well. They're concerned about whether they know the patient well enough to take a view on approaching the subject of whether a patient should withdraw or not. They lack confidence, they say, about the subject. They lack knowledge about discontinuation. And they express dissatisfaction with the guidelines, irritation with the guidelines, in fact, and a barrier of lack of time and lack of continuity. And one of the things that is really interesting for me about that research is at no time was withdrawal mentioned. And I asked Professor Kendrick about this. I said, did your GPs, they had forum groups, discussions, did any of your GPs mention anything about concern about their patients going into withdrawal? And nobody did. It didn't crop up. So here we are in 2019, still with doctors not recognising withdrawal as being an issue as part of helping patients take antidepressants or come off them. It's so easy to give out a prescription. There are no exit plans, and withdrawal is still not sufficiently recognised. It's relapse. This is how I feel pharmacists can help. And what I've been campaigning for is informed consent. That people know when they're given an antidepressant that they might get side effects quite early on. And there are danger points when they change their dose. This is when some people can actually have suicide ideation, mania, psychosis in the early weeks of taking an antidepressant. So monitoring is very, very carefully needed. I think patients need to know about their withdrawal effects, and the longer that you're on a drug, the more likely you are to experience worsening withdrawal effects. I think patients should hear that there is a possibility of permanent sexual dysfunction. I guess it's all about risks and benefits. And that if somebody is really seriously depressed, the benefits may well outweigh the risks. You know, I can't imagine what it must be like to be so depressed and so ill that you can't get out of bed and you can't take care of yourself. Under those circumstances, maybe the benefits do outweigh the risks. But for a lot of people, that won't be the case. Or, it doesn't matter whether it's the case or not. What it matters is the patient knows and the patient makes a choice. I didn't know. I didn't have the choice. And patients need to know, and I mentioned the Reed Davis research, and I'll quote it to you again, that more than half of people will get withdrawal effects, and nearly half of those will describe their withdrawal effects as severe. That's a lot of hand-holding, a lot of care that people need. So, as I get close to the end, how you can help: monitoring, deprescribing, and exit plans. That's what came to mind to me when I was putting this together. And there are things that I've campaigned for, and I've gone so far with it. But if you are going to be the people who are going to help take care of patients with this problem, then there are things that you need to push for because they don't exist at the moment. So, I had in mind optimal dose for patients. There must be minimum doses that patients can take and get the benefit that they need. I had to work out my own. I was given the same dose of Seroxat as a 20-stone, 6-foot guy would have been given. It wasn't necessary. I had to work that out for myself. We need clear tapering guidelines for each drug. It barely exists. Where it does, some of that knowledge is up in North Wales or with some of the charities. Thank you. It helps if people can take the liquid. Not all doctors are prepared to prescribe it. People need syringes to be able to take the liquid. We need pharmaceutical companies to make smaller tablet doses. And I don't know if you're aware, but there are such things called tapering strips, which you can access. They're available in Holland at the moment. A fellow campaigner of mine, James Moore, is trying to get them introduced into this country through a petition, and we're talking to as many people about those as we possibly can. Again, I've made a link to that at the end of my presentation so that you can look at they're incremental doses, strips with incrementally reducing doses, which would be really useful to help patients withdraw. Clear exit plans. Why can't we have, we're devolved, health is devolved. Do we have to wait for the NICE guidelines? I put that question out there. Can the All Wales Medicine Support Group do something about giving prescribers better guidelines now in Wales rather than waiting for NICE to get round to it? And you could push for a national prescribing indicator. I don't know, again, whether I could do many more on that. You may not agree with me. I'll leave the ball in your court for that. So there's something else that I want to say the last minute before I finish, that those of us who have campaigned about bringing to the attention of people how bad antidepressant withdrawal can be and how it's not recognised, we've been accused of pill shaming. It's a weird word, weird description, pill shaming. I don't understand how anybody could suggest that I think that anybody who takes an antidepressant, that it's something to be ashamed about. I took one for many years, and I don't see the relevance of there being shame or pride. It's about taking medication and whether it's the right thing for you and whether you understand about the medication that you are taking. So what I feel that is most important is this. That I believe that antidepressants help people and save lives. And that's the narrative that has been going on for years. That's what the media has always wanted to believe. That's what doctors have believed. And in this world of black and white, it would appear that, which is where the pill shaming comes from, I think, that if you believe the opposite to that, then this is a bad thing. What I am trying to get people to understand is that we can hold what are two apparently conflicting beliefs in our minds at the same time, that antidepressants also can harm people and can take lives. Both these things are true. And as you work with your patients to help them understand more about antidepressants, help monitor them, help give them the care that they need, please believe both these things are true, because the patient in front of you could be experiencing this or could be experiencing this. Thank you very much for your time.